to me. Okay, Eric, we're rolling.
Okay. You all set?
I'm okay. You get a.
I'm going to check my.
Am I doing all right sound-wise?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, anytime, Eric.
All right. One thing we haven't talked about yet is your childhood. Talk about maybe a few things that are typical or normal childhood, and then maybe a couple things that were kind of extraordinary about your childhood.
Well, I think it was a fairly normal childhood, just my brother and myself, and we went to public schools in Eugene, Oregon. Then when I had finished third grade, my parents moved just outside the city limits. And that meant we would go to a rural school with several grades in a room. And it was called the Dunn School. And we called it the Dumb School. We wanted to stay in the school we were at in the city, in Eugene, city being about 23,000 then. But my dad checked into it. We had limited resources, and he couldn't afford to do that. So we went there. Well, it turned out we were behind that rural school. But it was a great opportunity. I had a marvelous teacher who encouraged me by the name of Mrs. Rogers. Because it was in a multi-grade school, she ended up saying, sending a note home and saying, Paul's in the 4th grade. He can do 5th grade work. If it's okay with you, I'll just promote him to 5th grade. So in the middle of the year, I did that, and you know, it was a great opportunity. And the net result, I started college when I was 16. So that rural school ended up saving me a couple of years.
I'm going to readjust the camera here. Okay, now I'm ready again.
You all set?
Yeah.
Okay. Of course, there's going to be, you know, tough times in any family, you know, sibling rivalry, or things of that nature. But overall, how would you say your relationship with your brother progressed from when you were young throughout your adolescence? Oh,
I'd say we generally had a good relationship. As you know, brothers quarrel, and my father was a Lutheran minister and had limited income. My brother and I slept in the same bed, and I remember we were always fighting on who was on whose side. And we had a little bar in the headboard, and we would say, "Oh, you got over on my side," and the usual kinds of things. But generally, we have always gotten along well.
You've talked about how your dad was, you know, very outspoken about things. Did that affect your maturing process, you think, over other kids your age?
Oh, I don't think there's any question about it. He was interested in politics. He was not. He was on the local school board, but he was not interested in politics in the sense that he was a candidate ever or anything like that. But I remember when I was 8 years old, he took me to hear Eleanor Roosevelt speak. My parents were active in what we then called race relations. You would call civil rights today, and things were very, very different back when I was young. And I particularly remember, I think I've told you about this before, when the Japanese Americans were taken from the West Coast in February of 1942, and my father stood up and said that was wrong, and then we got all these hate phone calls and things, and it was a great lesson to me that if you believe something, stand up. And of course, my father was right, and public opinion was wrong.
Actually, that brings up something I was going to ask you about. After September 11th happened, people made comparisons to the Pearl Harbor attack. Whether that's right or wrong is irrelevant. But thinking back to the conversations your father had with you after that incident took place, how does that compare with any conversations you might have had, say, with your grandchildren now, or even with Sheila or Martin?
Well, I think what I have tried to convey, not only to my children and grandchildren, but the students in my classes, is that we can't generalize about people. So there were Muslims who hit the trade towers in an absolutely indefensible act. But that doesn't mean that we don't treat Muslims here in the United States with respect, or Muslims anywhere in the world. There are fanatics in, I suppose, every religion who twist religion. Religion can be a powerful force for healing or a powerful force for harm. And in this case was a powerful force for harm. And what we have to remember to do is to use religion as a force for healing rather than harm.
Did you find any of your father coming through when you would talk to your grandchildren about issues like that?
Oh, I'm sure. You know, and I can't tell you precisely this is what my father, once in a while, you know, I will pick up, he grew up on a dairy farm. And I remember my dad saying, even your cows ought to know that you're a Christian. You know, meaning you have to treat animals with respect as well as people with respect.
I was just going to ask you something. Okay. You said in your autobiography that your dad was the finest man that you've ever known. What qualities, what was it about him that made him that?
Well, he wanted to help people. That was number one. And he went out of his way. And when he died, the wake, and I was really opposed to wakes before my father died, because I always felt a little awkward going up and didn't know quite what to say. And frequently at wakes there were people who were having a good time. I didn't feel comfortable participating like that. But the people who came up and said, you know, I was really having a struggle and your dad helped me. Your dad lent me some money when I needed it. Your dad was a volunteer Thursday mornings at this school for the retarded. And I realized the great sermons my father preached. He was, if I may be immodest, a pretty good preacher. But the great sermons he preached were by what he did. And I think that's true for all of us.
What about your parents' influence? You've mentioned that they were somewhat strict. You know, you said that if there was a movie on the the Parents Channel or the Parents Magazine.
Well, Parents Magazine used to, maybe still does, I don't know, used to list movies and say this is okay for children under 12. This is okay for, you know, and before we could go to any movie, we had to get the approval of the Parents Magazine, and then up until a certain age, we could go to a movie once a month. And then I don't remember what age it was, and we could go twice a month. That's one of my vivid memories.
Did you find that you sort of carried on some of those stricter or conservative family ideals?
Well, I don't know that we ever had, you know, you can only go to a movie once a month after my wife and I had children. But I think we were careful. We tried to be a good influence on our children, as my parents were. Whether we were or not, I don't know.
Both your father and your brother went into the ministry. How important was religion within your family, and have you found through any of the you know, any of the instances in your life that your faith was ever tested?
Well, I don't think there's any question religion has been very much a part of me. Now, I have to add, I inadequately live my faith. I am not holding myself out as an example for others to follow that way. But, and I can't tell you, I didn't all of a sudden say, you know, on this vote, I've got to follow my religious beliefs. But my religious beliefs, for example, tell me you ought to help poor people. Now, my father lived that. He preached that. And I believe that's what we have to do. Kind of basic philosophy in government is that Paul Douglas, who was a great senator from Illinois, also believed very strongly, and he was kind of my political mentor. But Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Should I stop and get it, or?
That one over again?
Well, you were talking about Paul Douglas.
Oh, Paul Douglas, as well as my father, believed that government should be primarily there to help people who are struggling. The rich and the powerful can take care of themselves. And unfortunately, our system of financing campaigns gives them even more leverage. But if you really want to help your country, help those who are struggling, those who are at the bottom.
Now, you obviously didn't go into the ministry. What were some of the factors that led you to that decision?
I'm not sure. I know my parents wanted me to become a minister. In the first 3 years of high school, I went to a pre-ministerial academy, but I just sensed that wasn't where I should be. And so I decided I wanted to become a journalist. And that's what I was for a while, and I still do a lot of writing. But I ended up through a series of things in politics, and I've enjoyed it, as I've enjoyed the journalism side.
In fact, you said that if you didn't go to seminary school, that you may have eventually gone into the ministry, which is kind of ironic. Was there anything that had to do with the school itself, or?
Well, the school itself was not encouraging. I think that was part of it. I saw a lot of people who just weren't living up to the ideals that they were publicly professing, and I think that's a danger in religion generally, is that we mouth things but don't live them. And there's an old saying, "Still waters run deep," and I tend to think that people who are not ostentatious about their religion probably have greater depth than those who are very, very vocal. I'm sure there are exceptions to that on both sides.
What was the situation like? You said both your parents wanted you to be a minister. What was the situation like when you told them that wasn't going to be?
Well, I think it kind of happened gradually, and they realized that wasn't what I was cut out to do.
So there wasn't a big scene?
No big scene, no tears shed by my mother or anything like that.
So did they encourage, was it something where you said, I don't want to be a minister, I want to be a journalist, or was that a gradual progression into your interest?
I think that came about gradually. And I have to say I don't recall precisely now, but when I got into high school, I signed up to be on the high school newspaper and took a journalism class. So obviously I was interested in writing, but I don't know that I'd made a career decision at that point.
Did you do any writing on your own before you actually went into these activities in school, these journals?
Well, I did a little. My father published some religious periodicals, and occasionally he would, I'd have a little thing, and I'm sure he edited it, but would have my byline on it. And so I did a little there. And then other opportunities came along to do a little. And then when I was finishing high school, I had a chance to work at the Eugene Register-Guard and covering sports. And I worked there for about 14 months.
How did you like covering sports in comparison to the kinds of things that you did at the Detroit Tribune?
Well, I enjoyed sports coverage. I have to say I somewhat got saturated because I went to so many basketball games and everything else. I'm still primarily a football fan. I don't watch the other sports that much. But when SIU, I should start that sentence over, but when Southern Illinois University gets into the Sweet 16, I get excited like everyone else does here locally. And I follow, when it gets to the World Series or the NBA playoffs, I follow it a little. But I don't spend all the time that I once did. But one thing about sports writing, you have greater freedom. You can write more colorful language than you can if you're covering a city council meeting or something like that. And I think that was good for me.
Talk about your experience helping your dad publish his newsletter, you worked with your brother doing that as well, didn't you?
Yes. And my father just got into this very accidentally. He wanted to give out some kind of literature that people could take home from Sunday school or church. And there wasn't anything that he found. And so he started printing a little, just for his local congregation. And pretty soon others were asking, could you give us some of this? And so he ended up with a small printing plant. And my brother and I had the opportunity to learn to work very early. And I think that was good for us too.
Specifically though, what were the kinds of things that you and your brother did?
Well, we would do everything from folding papers to getting things ready for mail. And then as we got a little older, we would get involved in the mechanical side of things, feeding a press or watching a press run or, the other mechanical side of things.
Would you say that that was a major influence in your eventual decision to go into journalism?
I don't know that played a major role because I don't think the mechanical side of things ever intrigued me that much. I think the writing side always appealed to me a lot more.
Talk about your decision to leave college and take over the Troy Tribune. What kind of talks did you have with your father about it?
Well, my father called me, or maybe sent a telegram, I can't remember, but let me know that the newspaper in a town about 12 miles from where he lived in Highland, Illinois at that time, and the paper in Troy, the person who had it went to his local physician, and his physician told him, you have cancer. And in those days, if you had cancer, that was it. And he just went up and told the people who worked for him, I'll give you 2 weeks' pay, and he closed the door. Well, people in the community were desperate for a newspaper, and so desperate that they finally, the superintendent of schools knew my father, knew through my father that I was interested in journalism, and they contacted me and said, if you'll take over this newspaper, we'll give you a full mortgage from the local bank, which was an astounding thing to do as I look back on it, because I was 19 years old then. And so I went down there and took over that small newspaper and gradually built it up and then acquired some other newspapers.
What were some of the issues that you discussed with your parents about leaving school early?
Well, one of them was the very critical fact that I was going to finish my junior year in college, and I had 1 more year to go. And, how would I work that out? And I got a waiver from the regulations at Washington University in St. Louis that they would take me on a part-time basis as a student. There are rules where you had to be on campus 1 year to get a degree. And but after I got going in the newspaper, I was so busy I didn't have a chance. And then some years later, Bill Danforth, the chancellor of Washington University, asked me to come and speak at the commencement, where I received an honorary doctorate. And I told the graduates, let me tell you the easy way to get a degree.
So there was always encouragement then from your parents about taking over the Troy Tribune? Well,
they did encourage me, and they were always encouraging me. I would say in almost everything I did. They were very helpful, a positive influence for me.
Do you mind if I ask you about Gene?
You may ask about anything you want.
Okay.
If I don't want to answer, I won't answer.
Again, in your book, you said that that you and Gene were partners in every sense of the word. What was it about either your personalities or your ideals, your political ideals, that matched up so well?
Well, I think we were both on the same wavelength philosophically. Now, at that point, this was pre-Vatican II, all the admonitions from both Lutheran and Catholic sources don't have a Protestant Catholic marriage. And we read everything we could, and we decided if we got married, and despite everything we read, our marriage lasted a month or two, we were going to write something constructive, which we later did. But it was interesting, we were the only, in the Illinois Blue Book, you listed what organizations you belonged to. We were the only two white members who listed that we were members of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It's just a small thing, but it indicated we were on the same wavelength. And Jean was very helpful to me politically, and she understood when you had to grapple with tough decisions because she had gone through that.
How were both your parents and her parents, how did they deal with the
Well, I think it's fair to say on both sides they were not real happy about Jean marrying a Lutheran or my marrying a Catholic. But once that marriage took place and they saw that we had a very good relationship, then there were no more difficulties.
When Jean passed away, what did you find wasn't there in your life anymore?
Well, those first weeks after a death like that are really tough. And then, but you know you have to keep going. You just force yourself to keep going. And then during the day when you're busy, you know, it's not that bad. Coming home at night to an empty house is tough.
Have you ever found that being a politician was ever a strain on your family?
I can't say that I found it a strain on the family. It meant I was away from home frequently, more often than I wanted to be. But we also, we took our children to a lot of events that most children wouldn't go to. And we always set aside, you know, a weekend or a week in the summertime for a vacation, or sometimes a little longer than that. We drove up to Alaska. We drove down the Pan American Highway to San Jose, Costa Rica. We did a lot of things together. And when I ran for lieutenant governor, for example, I remember the summertime, we took the kids, we got a sitter and we took the kids and we visited not every county fair in the state, but almost every county fair, and they got to go on the rides, and they really enjoyed that summer.
I'm sorry to jump back, but I wanted to ask you about when you first met Jean. Can you talk about that?
Yes, she was a legislator from the northern suburbs of Chicago. And of course, I was from southern Illinois, and we met, and you know, we got along. But I didn't date her till about 3 years later. Every once in a while, people would, you know, try and match me up with somebody, and I had dates with quite a few people. But I would say I'm looking for a Lutheran Jean Hurley, and then I heard she was saying I'm looking for a Catholic Paul Simon. Well, we ended up compromising.
And it wasn't shortly after you began dating that you actually proposed to her.
Yeah, well, I think it was the third date we had. I proposed to her. Yeah.
How did you know so quickly? What was it?
Well, of course, I knew her very well from working with her, and then we just clicked. We got along very well.
So I was asking you about being a politician, having such a busy schedule. Do you ever remember a time, whether it was campaigning or during, you know, something that was, you know, very important within the legislature that you thought to yourself, this is too much, and it was, you know, too overwhelming for you?
No, but there were times when I did things that I thought would be the end of my political career. We had a real problem with corruption in the legislature, and I wrote this article for Harper's Magazine, which they titled, I didn't pick the title, but they titled The Illinois Legislature Studying Corruption. I had tried to get a couple of Chicago editors interested in doing a story on corruption in the legislature. And one of them basically said, well, corruption's always been here, always will be, you know, no big news there. And so I finally wrote that article. And when I did that, I felt that was probably going to be the end politically for me.
I was going to ask you about having your students over tonight.
Having what?
Having your students over.
Yeah.
When did you sort of, I know you've done it before in the past.
Yeah.
When did you start doing it, and what kinds of things were you
I did it right from the beginning. I wanted to have them feel comfortable with me, and so that, you know, it's the idea of bringing them to your home is social, but also they get to know you a little better outside of talking about whatever the subject is in class. And then they come. I got a phone call today from a student I had last year who wanted a recommendation, and I was pleased to give it to her. And I still have students from my earlier classes come in periodically or call me periodically, and I think that's what a teacher should do.
How important do you feel that it is to be here in Makanda, in Southern Illinois, in the house that you built yourself, near your daughter, near your grandchildren, and to...
Well, I think it's important that you want to serve. And I had a lot of invitations to other colleges and universities, all the way from Massachusetts to Texas to California. But here you have a higher percentage of students who are first-generation students. You have a higher percentage of minority students than most schools have. I sense that here I could really be helping people, and that's what enriches life. It's not what you have in the bank account.
This last question I wanted to ask you, I actually didn't have written down. But when I came in here, just noticing, you know, all the pictures of presidents on the walls and you know, other photographs that you have you ever thought about your own place in history? You know, your own placard on the wall, or how you want people to remember you?
I guess I'm going to have to let that up to you and others. I want to have a record that my children and grandchildren can be proud of. But beyond that, I don't think you should worry too much about plaques and statues and buildings being named for you and all those kinds of things. I think what you have to do is help people. And that's the kind of living memorial that you really want.
Well, that's all I have. Can you think of anything that you're curious about?
I'm not sure if I have enough tape. Where's that coming from? Give me a few seconds.
I guess, first of all, I'm by nature a workaholic. I'm happiest when I'm busy. And I can't imagine, even when I go on vacation, I always take some work along. And, you know, I can't just sit on a beach. It's just not my cup of tea. And then I also, part of it is philosophy, too. I think the greatest thing that God has given us outside of life itself is time. Much more important than money. Now, obviously, you have to have enough money so you can live comfortably. But beyond that, how do you utilize this treasure of time that you have? And I've lived long enough to find out that You know, the little extra things that you do for a student who just called me here by the name of Sarah. If I can do a little bit to help her, you know, that's going to take 2 minutes of time. Maybe that's a very valuable 2 minutes.
Do you think that there'll be a time in your life that you're either looking forward to, or that you think you can just relax and just have some?
Well, I've thought about at some point, you know, if I break a leg or something, maybe I can read a lot of the books that I haven't read that I want to read. But as long as I'm in good health,